Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg Mccallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world.
Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to a very special bonus episode of Founders Unplugged. I am joined by Yariv Ganor here, who is a startup psychologist. So I've already screwed it up 5 seconds.
Yeah, no, don't worry. I know that you don't edit the episode, but
yeah. Do you know what? I actually said to myself before it's press, like all day, I've been going, okay, when I introduce, I say startup psychologist, not a psychiatrist, and then I said it. So brilliant, great start. And yeah, we're going to be doing a very special episode, which I'll explain more in a moment what the format of today is going to be. But I'm going to hand it over to Yariv first of all to explain a bit more about himself. So Yariv, please introduce yourself to the world.
Yeah, okay. Where should I start? Maybe I will start with now, and I will go back.
Sure.
I am a psychologist,
Not a psychologist,
not a psychiatrist. Well, the main difference is that psychiatrists, they're allowed to give you prescription medicine, and psychologists, they're only allowed to talk about that. So that's it. In fact, that's what psychologists do. They talk about things a lot. But I'm actually a startup veteran. So I've been in quite a few startups during these past 19 years, mostly in marketing positions. I was CMO of 3 startups in mobile and mobile telecommunication and hardware. And then I hit my midlife crisis and I pivoted to clinical psychology. So I think that was at some point I actually realized that I want to mix the two, that I want to combine the psychological tools that I have with the intimate knowledge that I have of founders and the startup ecosystem. And as I started running through that as an idea, I found that there are a lot of things that founders and people from, I call them startup professionals, actually can't receive when they go to either a therapist or a coach that doesn't know this world, this arena. Obviously, there are the terms and the the jargon that you need to know, but there is also the realization of how stressful it is when you are about to launch a product, of the ups and downs and the emotional roller coasters that you can go through when you are fundraising, of the frustrations that you can get when you have problems with your co-founder, of a lot of different elements that come or affect your psychological state when you're a founder. So before I will dive into the more interesting things, I think, I'll also say that I am the father of 3. Still, I'm married to only one person, and I also have 1 dog, which is absolutely, I don't know, this sounds a bit weird. I sure you don't want to edit this out. It sounds a bit...
No, that sounds good to me. It's important. It's important context. People need to know who you are, so that's
fine. And prior to my career in startups and psychology, I was in special forces in the military for several years, and so these are, I think, kind of my vectors in life. And in these past 5 years, everything just kind of came together.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, and you are pretty active, in the startup community. Definitely in the circles that I know, your name pops up time and time again. You actually work with some people that I know on a regular basis. As they're your clients. People who I admire and I think very highly of as founders, and who are very open about their sort of mental health journey and their struggles and everything. So it's great to see you so prolific and so active in our community, making everyone very aware and helping people at the end of the day, and bringing these conversations to light. You've done quite a few events recently. I know you've been part of with the Dads Building Companies group. You're doing a lot there, aren't you, and so on. So is there anything coming up that you want to kind of shout out that you're involved with, maybe while we're here as well?
Yeah, there's actually a webinar which is
Right.
taking place tomorrow, but I'm sure that the recording will be out there
Yeah.
for a while. And it's about burnout. It's about founders burnout, which is sometimes, just those two words kind of stick together, founders burnout. And it's a bit different from what people who are not founders go through. So I will be talking a bit about that, and there are a few tools that I'm trying to deliver now using psychological theoretical theories and AI, just to create these tools that will be able to assist people in the startup community, mostly in terms of identifying where they are. So not really getting therapy, but kind of understanding whether they are going through burnout or whether they're going through an anxiety bout. Because there are so many keywords that are out there, and people say that they're stressed sometimes when they actually feel depressed, or people can say that they are burnt out when they are just anxious a bit. So I would like, first of all, to make some order, in what you're going through. People might be just moody and think that they are on the verge of a major nervous breakdown. So my goal, I think, is to make people in the startup industry much more aware about their mental state. The mental well-being, I think, is probably the most important piece of equity that a founder has. And I always tell my clients, well, you can dilute whatever equity you have, but never dilute your mental equity.
Yeah, and it's a topic that comes up time and time again when speaking with founders, and on this show too. The ideas of burnout. There's a few topics which I'm sure we'll get to in a moment. Burnout that came up actually yesterday, both with a recording for the main show, but then also with my wife, and maybe we can delve into why that was interesting, because of her perception of it was very, very interesting. If we have time, we can talk about that later. And a few other, the idea of self-awareness and understanding yourself and being reflective, and the importance of that for so many reasons, but also just to understand where you are. So it sounds like you're doing some great work there. So but we'll get into it. So today's format's a little different than usual. It's not just a standard. We're going to have a conversation, but we're going to inject it with something a bit different, which is, Yariv, you've gone back through some previous episodes of the show, the main show, and found us some clips, and you want to we're going to highlight them. We're going to play them. And you've got some comments, and I'm sure it will spark off a bit of a back and forth between us as we go. So are you happy for me to roll the first clip that you wanted to have a look at?
Yeah, I just want to say that the clips that I chose, I think, indicate the most common matters that founders deal with in terms of the mental well-being, sometimes without knowing that it even might affect that that level of work,
of performance overall,
yes,
that kind of thing.
Of how they carry themselves at an everyday level. So
that was your thinking when you chose them. Really, it was like these are the ones that tend to come up quite frequently in your work, and so that's
and also they are the ones that I think are most important for founders to know, that they are not the only ones suffering from. Right. There are so many others that are the same place where you are. And sometimes founders and people in the startup industry just think, I can't share this. Everybody else is doing great around me. Everybody's doing an exit or succeeding or whatever. I can't share my problems with the world. So yes, you can, and you should.
Absolutely. Okay, brilliant. All right. Well, I will get us into the first clip. Obviously, feel free to tell me to skip around or anything like that, or when you'd like to stop to talk. Just tell me stop, and then I'll stop once you feel like the clip has played the way you like it. So first one we've got here is from season 2. So let's have a little listen.
I've heard people say to me just like, you just need to take a break. I'm like, I know. I totally
But also,
understand
it's not that simple.
Like, there's only 4 people like working in the
Right.
company at the moment. If I take a break, who's taking like the slack, taking on the slack? And like, I'm the only one that does what I do. Like, we have 2 programmers, so I mean, they do different roles as well. So it's like, basically, if anyone goes on holiday, that role is just unfilled for that amount of time. So I can't wait to start building that support network through, not through networking, from networking, but like sort of building that into like my actual business, when I can get some more employees, and not because I want to be like the boss of all these people, but like genuinely coming into work and being like, how is everyone? Like, today's been tough. I've just answered like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we keep going?
Maybe, because she says today will be tough and stuff like that.
50 emails. Like, what have you done?
Yeah.
I kind of miss that about working with people from okay. But
well, and it allows you to actually focus on, like you said, not having to wear as many hats and wear the CEO hat, and actually drive the business forward as the CEO, which, you know, focus on those core responsibilities. But it's funny, you know, what you were saying there is one of the reasons why I get very frustrated around the rhetoric around burnout for founders and CEOs. I get. Well, there you go. See, the topic's already come up about burnout.
Yeah. I think you want to keep playing that?
Sure, absolutely. Up to you. I mean, it's your clip. Should we play a little bit more? Is it?
So let's just make a small pause and see if there's anything else, because there are like 3 or 4 things that are so unique to founders that come out from this very short piece of clip. Of course, there's the burnout, but I'll talk about that a lot tomorrow. And there's the issue of you know, wearing those so many hats. And it's not just a matter when you are starting up a company, it's not just a matter of what roles you are taking on. It's also a question of identity. And this can be so confusing, because when you are a founder, you are like the pivot, or the pivotal person in your company, right? Doesn't matter if it has like 30 people, 50 people, or just 4. You are the person, you know, you are like, I don't know why, but the image that popped to my mind is like, you know, the galleys of a slave ship. So you are both the captain of that ship, and you are the guy that beats the drums, and you are the guy that rows, you know. You need to do all of those together. And when you will be kind of exteriorizing that, when you go and present yourself, you will say, I'm a founder. Yes, you're a founder, but you're also a CEO or a CTO or whatever. And what happens quite often is that many people from the founding team are actually looking to establish themselves strictly through their, you know, through the role that they chose for themselves. Being a founder is constantly having like 2 identities. The one is that of the founder, the other one is that of the position that you hold. And it's very, 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 very complicated. I mean, if we think of people who are just, you know, I don't know, work somewhere as employee, but they're also dads or mums, or they have another role. That is something that is already difficult to do. So when you need to do all of those things together inside the realm of your startup, that is extremely complicated. And this is something that you don't see elsewhere. I mean, even top CEOs know that they are top CEOs. But a founder always has to be a founder and think of his startup like on the very highest strategic level. And obviously, there's a lot of emotional stuff that is going out there, because your startup is, as many say, my startup is my baby, but your startup is kind of your extension.
Yes.
And so as a founder, you take care of that extension. As a CEO, CTO, whatever, you take care of the more concrete stuff.
But the child analogy is a good one, though, because just like with a child, you're preparing that child for maturity, right? So you're not raising a baby forever. You're raising a baby, and then as that child grows, there's more input from the outside world into their upbringing. Initially, first few months, it's just the mother and the child. Then the father gets more involved. Then family gets more involved. Then schools and teachers, community, society, then the world, and eventually they're gone. And it's a very similar journey, which is why I think it's such a good analogy for startups, because that is the very difficult piece. It's done in a much shorter time frame sometimes, but for a founder to relinquish parts of the business over and still understand, well, what is my purpose? Because just like that's very difficult quite often for mothers to come to terms with the fact that they have to relinquish more and more of their parenting. It's very true, because it's less of an issue usually for fathers, because they don't have that very, very close bond straight from the beginning. That becomes very difficult, doesn't it?
It does. I think the first time that those two domains clicked, like the psychology and the startup, I was working as a psychologist in a children's hospital. And
Right.
I had this parental guidance session with a couple of parents who loved their child very, very much. And each of them had a very different way about how the child should be, or how you should grow that child up. And they resonated so much to me, those two co-founders that I knew back then, which also had this marvelous startup, but they had a very, very different way of how to go about it.
Mm.
And that was the first time I said, well, maybe there's something in there that I can, that I can look at, because parents are like founders in that respect. And there's this fantastic, he was a psychologist, but also a psychiatrist. One of the founders, I think, of modern day psychology, which is called Donald Winnicott, who was British, and he writes marvelously. And he just created this idea that for a mother to be there for her child, and that is the same goes for the father. You just have to be a good enough mother. And what does a good enough mother do? So that is exactly what you said. At first, you are very, very close to your child, and you take care of all his or her needs, and you're there, you're protecting them, you're guiding them. And then as the child progresses and grows, as a parent, you need to know to take that step back and let the child either fall, stumble a bit when they start walking, or learn a bit from their own mistakes, or just position yourself differently. Same goes with founders. Something that is very, very interesting, though, is that often for founders who don't make this equation between parenting and founding, they suddenly perceive their creation, so like the startup, as something that is completely the spitting image of who they are, of their own personality. And they sometimes tend to think that, well, no, the startup should be the way I am designing it, and they end up ruining it. Like,
right. So that projection, essentially, in the same way that you have with sort of helicopter parenting, where it's just that projection of what that child needing to be the embodiment of everything that they are and more, like what I wished I could have accomplished, almost, kind of thing.
Yeah. And then you see boards just kicking out the founder of the company, which is obviously someone very, very important, and yes, part of their DNA is in that company culture, but they started like really hurting the business. And when we had like unicorns, just take a look at the media from the past couple of years, and you can see examples of really unicorns being dissociated with their founding member.
I do think it's a really great comparison and analogy to draw. The more I think about it and talk about it, the more I think it works, because just like you said with and this as a father of three, and I'm a father of two. that the only way that you can know when is appropriate to step back and allow, and make those correct decisions is by being hyper aware of your child's current ability levels across a whole range of different areas, right? So you're only going to relinquish a certain amount of, I don't want to say control, but insistence to be involved and being overly protective or overly parenting on a specific area when you know that you can trust that child to do that. And it's exactly the same with your startup. You've got to be aware enough of the maturity levels across different elements of your organization to know if you've got the right people there, the right skill sets, to be able to sit back and let them go off and make mistakes and whatever else and mature and grow. It's the same thing. So, I mean, I suppose a lot of that then from both sides of this kind of comparison would be communication is key, because you can only really determine these things if you have very good channels of communication, both within your family dynamic and within an organization, to be able to get a good sense of where you are at those particular stages. Would that be a fair assessment? Because I'm not the psychologist here, so but that would be my assumption.
I think that your assumption is very correct, and I think that you're already like 70% of psychologists. No, you talk to people about their daily issues, right? And you help gain clarity about things. So,
right,
to me, you're 70% a psychologist. You mentioned the issue of communication. I think so many founders or top managers, CXOs of startup don't understand that. And it's really, people talk, well, everything is about communication. Communication is important, but if you think about the complexity of the communicational channels that a founder needs to hold, it's just astounding. I mean, first you got to talk to your co-founder, right? So that's one communication channel. Then within the company, you also need to communicate with your employees or managers, whatever. Then you need to communicate with your clients, right? With your users. And you need to communicate with your partners, if you have any, right? Other type of business partners who help promote your product or whatever. This is only the small aspect, the very core of the startup of a startup founder's communicational worries, because now you need to communicate with investors and with other stakeholders, and then you got to communicate with your board and your board members, and then you need to communicate with the people who can support you, which might be maybe your family, maybe your partner, maybe your friends. And so there are so many layers of communication, and the language is so different.
I was about to say as well, in each of those layers, the language you speak essentially is very different, right? So there's a different linguistic and cultural approach that you would take to each one of those channels out on top of that you need to navigate. And just the context switching alone between that would be mentally exhausting.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
I had a client who had an investor. My client was already a grown-up person, so middle-aged, and the investor was older than my client. What I was able to see in the relationship that they had between them was actually a duplication of a father-son relationship. Now, if you think about it, the investor has the money, may have the last word, depending on the relationship that is being developed there, but also provides you the feedback about how you are as a founder, as that person whom he chose to invest in. And so suddenly, from being the person who is responsible for everything, you are being looked up upon from kind of a paternalistic position. And it was only when we got to analyze that just a bit that he suddenly identified that. He said, "Oh my God, I'm trying to act in a way that my investor would be happy with me, but not from a business perspective, but rather from a personal, childlike perspective."
He's looking for that person to be proud of him.
Absolutely.
Almost, right? I see. Yeah. So it's approval they're looking for, as opposed to, well, I mean, I suppose they're both forms of approval, right? Yeah.
That was that specific case. Sometimes it might be approval. Sometimes it might be just people looking for an echoing voice. Sometimes people just want their funding partners to be enablers, not
right.
more than that. But then again,
but I suppose we're all, I mean, not to get too far off down the rabbit hole, because we've got other clips to go through. But,
sure.
But I suppose, in essence, we're all looking for forms of validation, right? Within our relationships, whether that's a pat on the back, a well done, I'm proud of you, good job. For the most part, that's what I think we all crave that on some level, some more than others. Maybe if they've been deprived of that earlier on, but wouldn't you say that the majority of us thrive off of that to some degree?
Yes, and yes and no, because there's this wonderful element that I think needs to be acknowledged, and that is startups, wherever they are, and founders, wherever they are in the world, no matter the size of the startup, always evolve in the same way. If you zoom out, you see that they always evolve in the same way. And there is the ideation phase, and then there is the proof of concept. And proof of concept is like the first stage of that validation, right? And you get that validation not as a person, but as a creator of an idea. And when you get that proof of concept, people will tell you, well, yeah, that can work. That's really nice. So you as a founder, you can absorb, the more narcissistic elements of that, saying, oh, great, I've got this person who is an expert. And they say, well done. But then as the startup continues to grow and you don't get funded, for example, then, you find yourself in a very weird place. You go like, well, there was this guy who is an expert in this is that my concept is great. How come all the other people can't see that this concept is great? So it doesn't really eventually doesn't always get summed up by the amount of validation that you get. It is also by the amount of place that you can take within the other. So that space and peace of mind you can capture, whether it is among your investors, among your users, among your co-founder, and the other people that are around you. It doesn't matter if they like you. It doesn't matter if they validate you for being a person of talent or just a boss. You need to create, for many founders, they need to create this system where they can set the rules. And I think this coincides very well with the fact that a lot of founders, for example, have ADHD. And for a person who has ADHD, following rules that other people make is quite complicated. And so they go and make up their own world. I think that is probably, I don't know if the main motivator. I think there's probably some statistics about that, but it's being able to create a world that you can control, that you can be that you can be in control of, and that feedbacks you with positivity.
Well, then
Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but then in that case, I wouldn't recommend becoming a founder if that's what your goal is.
As I said, founders are very, very, very different. People are very challenging as clients and very, very interesting because, and again, I mean, I know you want to show the next clip, and I want to do that too, but something that is important, and then I'll try to shut up.
No, it's fine. Yeah, take as long as you need.
No, I will try to shut up. Many founders are highly intelligent people with a huge amount of motivation. In fact, there are some traits, some characteristics that are very unique among founders, which is the ambition, the self-reliance, the self-motivation, the sense of agency. So a lot of things, the creativity, a lot of traits that have been identified to be very characteristics of founders. And whenever this comes to play in the sessions that I have with them, many times you get to very, very interesting places. For example, I had a client who had issues with his co-founder, right? And he had a problem. So his co-founder left, and he had a problem finding another co-founder. And for months, he wasn't able to find that co-founder. That threw me to, trying and understand how that person manages relationships, couples relationships. And at a certain moment, that client told me, I can't go there. I'm not, I don't have the what's the word I'm looking for? I don't have the mental
capacity
right now.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
to go there. I need to understand why it is that I can't find a co-founder. And I said to myself, of course he can't go there. That was back in the days when I just started. I said to myself, of course he can't go there. He's not sufficiently available to kind of search his soul. So I need to provide him something that will be very efficient and very clear and very applicable in terms of what that person is looking for.
But why do you say, of course, he can't go there, as if that's kind of an obvious thing? I mean, it may be obvious to you, but what do you mean by that? Because of the fact that he's a founder and has so many other priorities.
Absolutely.
Is that what you mean? Right. Okay.
Absolutely. So many other priorities, and it's not just the priorities on his checklist, but it's the priorities in his mind,
like headspace. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Interesting.
And so this is often very challenging, but also quite helps me keep and kind of stay on my edge, so that I will be able to provide my clients something that is very, very operational, that is very concrete, that they can do something with it once the session is over.
Yeah, because founders are very outcome driven, right? As opposed to, interesting, very interesting. Okay, well, look, I'm. let's move on to the next clip then.
Yes.
So
I managed
we've
to
got.
shut up for a second.
So the next clip we've got is from this season, and it's with a great conversation with and Purdy from Hotbed. So let's have a look at this. On for both of you.
Do you want to Purdy? You get last. Okay. I would say mental health is now a hot topic. But I think it's great that people are talking about it. Founders, it's been widely reported, have a much higher likelihood of suffering from anxiety, depression, and personality disorders. I think the way that it's being talked about is not particularly helpful. And I'd like to see more expanded conversations in this. I really think like there's a lot more people suffering than we realize. And yeah, I'd like to see that be.
What do you mean the way we're talking about it isn't particularly helpful? What do you mean by that specifically?
Yeah. So to start with, I hate the term mental health. I actually think that like I think just calling it mental health starts us off with the wrong foot. Like realistically, there's no difference between your mental health and your real health, and kind of adding on that little like.
I remember when she said that really stood out to me as and I think she expands on it later, but like that was a quite an astute observation, I thought. But,
yeah, I wanted to ask you what you thought about that.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
What did you want me to play any more first before we kind of go into it, or?
No, I think it's good. And I started babbling a bit about that. When I said that founders are very challenging clients. I agree about how she describes mental health. I mean, we all have our mental health, right? The same way we have our physical health. When you're a founder or when you work in a startup, you are actually required to use your mental capabilities and deliver. And so if your mental abilities are restricted, whether it is because you're under stress or you're depressed or you're just, I don't know, your mind wanders, then your ability to deliver is less. Your ability to be, I'd say that your ability to be a peak performer is really hindered, right? And I want to relate that also to what we saw in the first clip. You know, for people feeling better on a mental level, you often say, well, go out on a vacation, take a break, and do something, I don't know, do something different for a change, right? Founders can't be there. Founders have a very, very hard time disconnecting. And it's not just disconnecting from your phone. It's disconnecting from what you do and a part of your identity. So it's like you know, it's like saying to someone, well, stop being a dad for a while.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, you can have a break away from the kids, but it doesn't mean you're not going to sit there worrying about them or thinking about them. And
exactly.
Yeah, you can't switch that off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know, we tend to see, and actually it's true, we tend to see founders, especially in the tech industry, as very logical people, right? But it is so seldom that we get them to acknowledge that when they hit a problem that they can't solve by logic, that they actually, you know, they struggle mentally, they struggle emotionally. And yes, occasionally you will see people turning to substance abuse. In other cases, you will see people developing an anxiety disorder, for example, which is very, very common among founders. So, like she actually addresses that. Well, the research, the only research that I know of that is most quoted, was done by this American psychiatrist, and he found that in the US, founders had like 2 times more anxiety than the general population, 3 times more depression, 10 times more bipolar disorder. So being manic depressive is 10 times more common among founders than the general population. Usually, the general population, the rate is 1%. So if it's 10 times more, it means 1 out of 10 on average.
She also mentioned something, two other things there that were quite interesting. So she mentioned about personality disorder, which I mean, what you're describing there isn't technically classed as a personality disorder. Am I right in saying that? You're talking about, I mean, yeah. So that's different, right? I mean, that's potential narcissistic tendencies or antisocial behavior and things like that,
yes,
or psychopathy. So she mentioned that, and then of course she mentioned that thing about how it's maybe not being talked about in the right way now. So what's your opinion on those two things? The personality disorder thing, is that accurate? First of all, what she said, do the studies indicate that founders and CEOs generally exhibit more proclivity to having some sort of personality disorder?
As far as I know from the material that I've read, and there's not, I need to tell that really that there's not enough of research when it comes to founders or the psychopathology of people from the startup world. It's actually a dream of mine, and I don't know if there's anyone listening to this or watching this who is in a university and wants to help me do my PhD in that. That would be great. What you see is that usually CEOs are much more inclined to have personality disorders. When it comes to the narcissistic ones, when it comes to the more sometimes, I don't want to get into the details because there are quite a few
so ranges of sociopathic narcissistic.
So sociopathic, yes, sociopathic is already in the very acute side of the pathology.
Right.
But usually you would see people, for example, very moody people, or people who are, we will say, are neurotic, right? These are people that have like this type of personality disorder, or people who are avoidant. Avoidance is like a personality disorder. Or you can get people who are very, for example, borderline.
Right.
So borderline personality disorder, right?
But I noticed you said
BPD.
CEO. So presumably that could be not specific necessarily to the startup ecosystem. That can be CEOs in any, just in general, right? So we can be talking about C-suite across the corporate landscape, and of course that, I mean, the distinction there can be quite blurred, right, in terms of the line of when a startup technically is then considered just a corporate enterprise. But presumably that would mean that quite often those CEOs weren't actually the original founders; they were employed to be CEOs later. So is that what you mean essentially by the data being a bit unclear, because there isn't really much, I guess, research specifically into founders turned CEOs versus just C-suite in general, right?
So for that, I will say that there is a lot of information when it comes to people who are, for example, engaged as CEOs. The work is being a CXO, right? And there you can find quite more data when you compare it to just founders. You need to remember that founders need quite a solid, I'd say a solid personality structure for them to be able to create a company. And I think that this creativity is something that has to do not just with the ability to think or mentalize an idea, but also to bring something to life, basically. Because you need to have an idea, but you also need to know how to get the foundations of that idea up and create a good basis for a company to evolve. CEOs, people whose work is CXOs, are not required to do that.
Yeah, it's more clearly defined as a role. It's more of a top-down approach. So presumably on that basis, then, if we take those two definitions, then really, a founder's one of the key traits, I suppose, from a founder is the ability to collaborate, right? Which entails presumably a lot of other traits in of itself. The ability to socialize and to get on well with people, etc., etc. Whereas, which almost by definition means that you can't have as much narcissism or psychopathy there, because that wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to engage in that way. You wouldn't be able to build something, and it would kind of negate that creative growth process. Whereas in order to keep something running at peak efficiency or to continually scale it, let's say aggressively, actually those traits may be more beneficial at a certain level. Would that be a fair kind of?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And just to make two clarifications. Well, one of them is that psychopathy today is called antisocial behavior.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the name represents much better.
I assume that's because it covers a much broader range of personality disorders than psychopath.
Also it explains that the person has problems with emotions and with being able to communicate those emotions.
Right.
So, I mean, to be engaged socially, you need to express something, be understood, and understand others.
To be empathetic, right?
Yeah. Yes, and the ability to be empathetic is something that people with antisocial disorders
that's missing.
They simply lack this capability. The second thing I wanted to dive into just a bit is the difference between people who are founders and either take the role of the CEO or the head manager, and people who are founders and have other type of roles like VP R&D, CTO, stuff like that. They are very, very different. If I need to categorize and generalize, they are very, very different people. Very much so. So if the CEO will be often someone who is much more out there and maybe more communicational, you often see among CTOs, VP R&Ds, and people from the technical aspect of things. You will see people who don't like to be out there and engaging in social exchanges. And I think this is very interesting to know, because from a psychological perspective, you will often find people who are on the autistic spectrum there. And there's been
interesting. Is that quite a common
very
trait?
much.
Oh, interesting.
Very much. Among engineers, among developers, among people who are very technical roles where they need to work within a very defined structure, a very defined frame. And there was actually an interesting research that I saw somewhere that mentioned that about 6% of web developers in the UK know that they have that they're on the autistic spectrum. Okay, so these are the people who've been who've checked this out,
right?
And and have been found to have that. Many other don't know that they can be on the autistic scale, but they do find it more complicated to have small talk or a large group of friends, or know how to engage or find the way out of a conversation in the office.
Right.
And so I think this is something that is also very, very interesting, and some of my clients come from that group, but that may be the subject of another talk.
Very interesting. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. Well, let's move on to the next clip then. So this one's from season 2, episode 36, with Ollie and Harry from Startup to Stand Up, two amazing guys, and a great organization actually for offering support to founders. So yeah, let's play this clip. As always, tell me to skip ahead or
Sure.
stop whenever whenever you like.
No bullshit approach, which is kind of my
Straight off with the swearing. I love
it.
brand as well. Just being like, you don't need me, have 1 hour and you should, I want to make myself redundant. Like, that's the point. And so I completely get that. That really resonates with me. And I'm glad to see that other people, I think, are seeing what I'm doing.
Well,
and
I think I may actually be in the wrong place.
I really am a believer in this. And I think what you said earlier, founders learn best from other founders.
Right.
And
that's it. You can stop here.
Okay.
Okay. You were in the right place. Founders learn best from other founders.
Right.
Again, taking the example of parenting, and I hope this doesn't mean that people who see this and are aspiring founders think that they need to go and get babies right now. It's like you can assume, you can imagine what it is to be a parent. But until you've really experienced that, then, you'll be missing some vital information as to what this means. Same goes to being a founder. And the statistics are amazingly supportive of the fact that second-time and third-time founders are much more successful than first-time founders. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot to learn from the experience. But it's not just the element of, the track record or the small tips that you can get or the advice that someone might give you. There's a lot more to that. There's really that sense, there's really that need to be helped in some way. When you are a founder and you are a first-time founder and you try to do something, you want someone to be there on your side, just, to share those experiences that you're going through, those fears, those moments where you kind of lose confidence.
Mm.
And you want to have that someone being there telling you, I don't know, maybe this will work. Why don't you try it out?
Mm.
Just providing you this extra mental ping pong you can have.
Sure. Yeah. Or maybe telling you it is a bad idea as well. That's equally helpful,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm.
I mean, again, just like with being a parent, and I'm kind of repeating myself, no one will be able to tell you this for sure will be the right thing, or this is obviously the wrong thing. They used to say that babies should sleep on their back, and then babies should sleep on their belly. And, these things change over time, and you will be able to find evidence for one or the other. But just having that someone there that you trust, whether they are founders or experienced founders or people who know founders or who have worked with founders, just have that someone echoing you back what it is that you are feeling, what it is that you are going through is so very helpful. And of course, if this is someone who has been in your, you think has been in your shoes, then it's perfect.
Mm.
And this is why sorry.
No, I was just going to say, look, I'm obviously very much an armchair psychologist, and I studied sociology a long time ago. So when I say the things I'm about to say, please bear that in mind. But my understanding as well, going back to that parenting analogy, which I still think is a really, really good one, so that's why it's good to keep going back to that. Is that to deliver some of the best development and life outcomes for children. In some studies, I believe, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, you tend to find that the best environments that create these best outcomes tend to be families that have multi-generational support. So you have the parents, but then you also have grandparents' involvements and presence in there, but then also really strong communication and feedback loops between parents on parenting. So parents that are able to sit and talk about parenting, give each other criticism, give each other feedback, and together, that's really important. So it is very similar to what we're talking about. It is this idea that a business is only going to succeed in the early stages if the founders can criticize one another on their ability to do their job in a very respectful and open way, and have the freedom to do that. Equally, to get previous generations of founders or contemporaries, i.e. other parents, and be open to listening to their feedback as well. And what you generally find is it's very difficult to give a parent advice on parenting, actually, because we're very protective. And same goes for founders. Founders, they're just generally not going to say. But again, you do have to still take that advice with a pinch of salt, because your grandmother, who grew up in the 20s and 40s, you raise a child then very differently to the raise a child now, in the same way that you would build a company very differently 20 years ago as you would do now. So I guess that you still, yes, be open, listen, but then also sprinkle everything with a grain of salt when it comes to, based on who you're getting that advice from. But
yes, absolutely. And I think this is one of the things that as I was looking for clips that I found out about your show, is that you actually bring that perspective. You have people who were founders in the beginning of the millennia, and you have people who went through the burst of the bubble back in 2008, and you have people who were there when no one was able to say AI. Okay, which is not that long ago, but it already seems like
some with the internet. Like, I had someone from who helped found elements of Google in the UK, and like the internet was just a new thing.
Yeah. I remember there was this. I don't know if you met that, but there was this website that was on for a really short time, which was called, I think it was called Yahoo Google. Did you get to see that? And
no.
It would just, you would put in a search. It was kind of a search engine, but what it would really do, it would split your screen in the middle, and on the left you had Yahoo, and on the right you had Google, and it would give you what each found. So for a short while, there was this Yahoo Google thing out there when people started learning about how to use search engine. Yeah, so really there's this huge amount of advice that is available. Getting a mentor is so important. It doesn't matter if that person created their own business back in the 60s, I think, or is the current CEO of an AI company. As long as you find someone that can really make you hear yourself out and help you with making things much more clearer, giving you that mind space. I think that as a founder, this is just priceless.
It's hugely valuable. Yeah. I see. To go back to that analogy again, I see those dynamics, advisors, mentors, as kind of like the grandfathers and grandmothers in the equation, and then I see just kind of what I think he's referring to. I suppose we refer to both in that conversation. Actually, we talk about the benefits of mentors and advisors, but also about being parts of networks, small, even personal networks of other founders too. And that's a bit like when you start going to nursery, taking your child to nursery, and you become friends with other parents who have the similar sort of age child as you, and then you go on play dates and stuff like that. It's like that. It's then you find your tribe of people that maybe you don't have, because all your friends haven't had kids yet and they're still drinking and staying up at night. You need to have that sort of thing. It is a very good analogy. By the end of this talk, we'll have beaten this analogy to death, but it works, doesn't it? Maybe there's a book in there somewhere writing about at least one, yeah, if not more. Because if we're just talking about the early years aspect of it, we haven't even started talking about the teenage years and the adolescence. I mean, that's a mess. Wait until your startup hits puberty. That's a whole other kettle of fish.
You just made me think of one idea that I had at a certain moment in time, and that is that, just like a child, your startup has its own identity. Yes, it gets a lot from its founders, but then again, it gets a lot from everyone who works in that field. And then suddenly you need to add another feature or pivot or something like that. And suddenly your startup changes.
Yeah.
And it's no longer that, that child whom you knew, that very nice little boy, suddenly they have mohawks and
it has autonomy. Yeah.
Yeah.
It will rebel. There'll be a rebellious stage. Yeah. Excellent. I do like this analogy. Okay, well, we've got another clip. We're going to go back to the same episode we had a couple of clips ago with from Hotbed. So there's another clip you wanted us to look into. Where empathy is involved and empathy isn't, and I think there's a difference there, and especially when people need to hear it. Because I'm assuming you guys must have come across people that really needed to hear some sort of pretty harsh truths of advice in your time, right?
Yeah. And go ahead. I've had so we have had investors, like, for anyone that's listening to this thinking, yeah, but if an investor tells me to do something, I'm just going to do it because I want their money. We have had investors say to us that if they sat down with someone for half an hour and said, you need to change 20 things, and then someone then captured them and had changed all 20 things, they would think that they don't have enough integrity in their own business and their decisions, which means actually you have to listen to some of it, but you can't listen to absolutely everything that they say, because then the investor thinks, well, if you're just going to completely change your opinion, everything based on one person's feedback, how good of a business leader are you going to be? Like, you need to
so manipulative.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's gaslight.
Yeah.
There's my 10 cents being thrown in at the end there. So what interested you about this clip?
This is really I started to talk about it a bit earlier on, about the unparalleled relationship that founders have with their investors. And it can be very constructive, or it can be very destructive, both for the startup and the founder, from a psychological perspective and of course from a business perspective. Think about those investors who tell you, well, now you need to pivot. Okay? Going back to the parenting child analogy, it's like someone comes and tell you, well, now you need your girl to be a boy, or you need your daughter to like.
That's a topic we should probably stay away from in 2024 on this show. But I see your point. Yeah, it's like, okay, go a different route. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for the warning. I wasn't talking. What one of the most annoying thing about being a psychologist is that everything has a lot of meaning, or you can look into everything.
Yes.
And I was actually once heard or participated in a workshop of working with people who define themselves differently from a gender perspective, and it has become so complicated, really so complicated, and requires so much more empathy.
A very delicate approach.
Delicate, but also very broad perspective. You really need to place yourself. Just as I think, it has its parallels with what I'm doing with founders. I call myself sometimes startup psychologist. It doesn't exist. Why is it that you need someone who will understand startups exclusively? Why is it that you need someone who understands people who don't want to commit to one specific type of gender, right? So things are, the world in which we live in is really, really very complex. And when it comes to investors, I think that a lot of time founders can become too dependent on their investors in terms of their mental well-being. And I go back to what I said at the beginning. I often tell my clients, don't dilute your mental equity. there's already someone else in there that asked for bits of your creation, of your, your life's project. It does not mean that they need to have a part of your identity, of your personality, of your self. And I find too often that founders can stumble or just, fall into that place where they go like, well, if I will not do that, then I will lose the support of my investor. And sometimes investors do take advantage of that.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you about. Maybe this is a very difficult position for founders because, this is perhaps the decisions that they make or the way that they interpret feedback, as is mentioned in this clip. I mean, I think they're more specifically talking probably about very early stage, about fundraising at this particular time, as opposed to having investors on the board. But regardless, if we focus on that for a moment, I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of those decisions, the way they interpret that feedback, and the directions sometimes is motivated by fear, and it's motivated by survival, right? Because at the end of the day, these are the people, especially as you now have a responsibility to sometimes quite an enormous amount of people who are all looking to you to, and relying on you to secure the next round of funding. Those relationships are important in securing that security, basically, and providing your team with a place to work. Suddenly you're responsible for their jobs and their safety. So it adds a significant layer of complexity to the way that you interpret that information, right?
Right. First of all, it's not just when you're early on and you're onboarding investors. It can also happen when there is an investor that you really, really want, that has either a strategic or an emotional value, right?
Good point. Yeah.
And also, I think that founders often mistake investors for, well, not friends but partners. And I hope I won't get investors too annoyed by saying that, but investors and founders are like oil and water. Investors want to secure their investment. They want to do things in a safe way, while founders are really the opposite of that. They just want to go out and try what catches on. Investors want to do things in a very structured manner, and the founder is still not fully consolidated about what his creation will be like, what shape his idea will be like. And I've actually heard of investors who sometimes invest in the people and not in the idea. And this is, I think, a trauma for investors when they come with an idea that they spent a year or two developing, and they get to that investor, and that investor says, well, yeah, but you guys actually interest me more than what it is that you just brought here. It says yes, what you did is nice, but let's put that aside for a minute and let's see if you can work better with different people, because I know these people who I invest in, and they are great, and they are looking for you, and that can be a great match. That's like trying to create something that isn't always natural.
It's like putting together a boy band instead of signing a solo artist.
like a social experiment in a way. Or you get those investors. You come with your idea to an investor, and the investor can tell you, well, yeah, I saw something similar last year and it didn't work, so I don't know, there is something interesting in your tech, but that idea won't fly.
Yeah,
this is very, very different, coming from a very different position, because too often those investors are not or haven't been founders themselves.
Yeah, and it might be worth me pointing out, I suppose, to those listening and watching now, we are speaking in generalities, right? Which I think it's just worth saying and pointing out. We're being general, and I would assume you are too. At least I am. We are being general, but there are, of course, exceptions to everything we've mentioned up to this point, and we will continue to mention. But yeah, I think it's a fairly good observation to make in a general sense. Look, we've got 3 more clips that we have in the list, but we've technically really, I think, only got time for one more. So do you have a particular preference? There's one we've got about talking about roller coaster, one about problem solving approach to founders. I think it was remote work culture.
Yeah.
And then in fact another one on this same video. So which one would you prefer?
Let's talk about the roller coaster one, because I think it's something that almost every founder will find.
Yes, and I remember, this is interesting that you chose this one too, because I remember when I spoke to Lara at the very beginning of this conversation, which this clip is that you've chosen. She was telling me she'd had a very tough week and she'd had a very tough day, and we talked about that a little bit at the beginning, and I think that's why maybe you picked up on this. So good pick. But hopefully, I believe I made her feel a bit better by the end of our conversation. I don't know, but we'll see. Okay, I'll play the clip.
That was good. Really nice speaking to her. But otherwise, I've been feeling a bit flat, to be honest. I just feel like I'm not getting anywhere. I feel like there's not many wins happening, and it's just, I just feel like I need a win. I got turned down by Sainsbury's a couple of weeks ago on really dumb reasons. And then, still trying to raise. It's just hard. How it goes up and down.
I do, and look, we can get into that a little bit, and maybe explore that if you're open to it, because I think it's important for people to hear about that. And it happens to all of us, myself included. I had a week like that, to be honest. Last week was quite a tough one for me, and it's ups and downs, and that's why any small win is huge, and I don't think people appreciate that unless they're in this space, that you can run up to someone and be like, oh, this has happened, and it can be really insignificant, and someone's just like, your friends or whatever be like, okay, that's a very insignificant thing, but that, for us it's huge, right? So but before we jump into,
I think that was broadly. Was there anything else, or was that was pretty much?
I think that's it.
Also, I just want to point out, I'm holding a pencil for some reason. I have no idea why I'm holding a pencil. I'd never use a pencil for anything. So I just...
A pencil? Now?
Why am I... No, in this clip. Why on earth am I holding a pencil? It's the most bizarre thing. I'm trying to think why I'd be holding a pencil. It's just bizarre. Anyway, never mind. Let's not even hear all that.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
So yes, why was this clip particularly interesting for you?
We'll leave that to a different session later on if you want.
What as to why I'm holding a pencil?
Yeah, sometimes a pencil is just a pencil, but
maybe there's a deeper meaning as to why I chose. Yeah.
I could have. I think I could have just summed everything up with that sigh that she has, that 1 second sigh where she goes, I think this is so relevant and echoes so well what so many founders are going through. Just that moment of despair and what the hell am I going to do next? And yes, it has gained the name of roller coaster, or emotional roller coaster, in its larger context. And I think the most important thing about that is to zoom out for a second and understand that we are all living. If you take your week, your whole week has been like a roller coaster, right? Only if you spend it out over a week, then you don't really feel the huge ups and the very deep lows. And that is why it is so important to acknowledge that when you're a founder, everything happens much quicker, in a higher density, It's like living inside a pressure cooker. Everything is going on with a lot more intensity. And when we don't have the time to hash through things, to really go through what we just had, because we now need to take a look at that feature, or we now need to jump on that call with that potential investor, or we now have to address a really urgent email about marketing or whatever, then that specific experience of being inside a roller coaster is much more important and affects us a lot more. And so we can't really find that stability anywhere. And it doesn't matter if your startup is struggling or if it's succeeding. What I've gathered from the clients and founders I spoke to in the past 5, 6, 7 years is that there are some moments where it's quieter and the others are just roller coasters. So you can almost never have a time period that is long enough when you say, wow, I feel great. You either feel very strained, or you feel the ups and downs, or you feel that you have a moment to breathe. But that is it.
But then usually, ironically, in that moment to breathe, there's usually an enormous amount of guilt associated with that point too, where you feel like you're not doing enough. And so you're questioning, am I cut out for this? And then a lot of doubt creeps in actually in those quieter moments, at least from my own experience. So even then, you know, we for some reason just burden ourselves unnecessarily because we feel it's the right thing to do. And I think it takes a certain amount of experience to recognize that as an opportunity and to seize that as an opportunity of like, oh, things are calm for a minute. Let's go and relax. Let's go and recuperate. Let's go and do something with that. And don't feel guilty. It's okay. It's fine. It's allowed. But it's few and far between, especially once things really get going. That pretty much disappears anyway, to be honest.
Yeah, you're very right. It's like, you know, when you turn off your car, there's always a bit running there. I don't know if it's what part exactly it is.
Yeah, it's like residual heat. Yeah.
And you need to go past that moment where the car goes completely quiet and everything stopped. And even the radio is off, right? And then you can enjoy that moment of quiet, basically. And really, really take in that moment of quietness. And it's something that founders struggle a lot with. And not just founders, developers, marketeers, sales, biz devs, QA, people who actually work in startups where everything is in that pressure cooker mode.
And I suppose to some extent this applies to everyone, right? I mean, you know, life is busy, life can be stressful. Just being an adult, you know, being a parent, being a homeowner, working a job, like that's broadly good advice, I would say, for any human adult in the modern world. Especially considering how loud and how obnoxious the modern world has become, and how stressful, you know, navigating modern life can be for some people. So that's probably just not bad advice to follow in general, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely. And if I, because I want to you know, open the parenthesis about people working in the startup world, I think it's crucial for people in that industry to be aware of that, you know, because highly efficient, top performing individuals, intelligent people, they think really that they can go on forever.
Right.
And you can't.
Mm.
You know, eventually, even the best of cars, even if it runs on solar power or never-ending fuel, its parts will start to deteriorate, right? They will be like used, and you know, and the car won't run as good as it used to.
The laws of physics still apply, right? But
Yeah.
that's perfect a segue into the last thing I wanted to talk about that we said right at the beginning, if we had time we would, which is the idea of burnout, because that's essentially what we're getting to, I think, with that analogy, right? And where we're going from. So I mean, just really quickly as well, it's probably worth saying that you might be interested to hear this, that almost, I would say probably 70-80% of the founders I speak to will come back to me afterwards and message and say that it was really amazing experience to have that. I found it quite therapeutic, which I always found interesting. When that first started happening, I was like, oh, interesting. But they say it's because they never really had the opportunity to sit down and talk about their life and their journey and appreciate truly what they'd accomplished until they were saying it out loud for the first time. Or in the case of like Lara having a bit of a bad day or a bad week, having the opportunity of that catharsis, you know, to just be able to kind of get it out. So I just thought you might be quite interested in that. But yeah, to go back to the burnout thing then. So I mentioned this came up for me. So yesterday we had a recording with a founder, which will be coming out in a few weeks. And he brought up the subject of burnout, and he described it as, and we ended up having a discussion about it, but he described it as he has a lot of mini burnouts. Right, that was his experience, and he's become quite self-aware of that. He's a very intelligent guy, and he's become very self-aware in his 7-year entrepreneurial journey of recognizing the signs of when he's about to have one of these mini burnouts, and then prioritizes and says, right, okay, I need to step away, you know, and so puts things in place so he can do that, even if it's just for half a day, a couple of hours, or a full day, whatever, to then recuperate, because he understands the importance of needing to do that to then be able to come back, you know, fully focused. And I said to him, I'd pretty much figured out the same thing, but I'd never used that term mini burnout. I thought it was quite an interesting topic, so I brought it up at the dinner table with my wife, and she completely didn't get it. And in fact, if anything, she felt quite insulted. This is really interesting, I think, quite insulted that I was making a distinction in some way between being a founder and how burnout affects me versus her as a wife and as a mother and as someone that, you know, that works full time, you know, part time and everything out as well. It's like, well, you know, she was kind of like getting quite defensive and insulted, like, well, I have burnouts too. Like, you know, what makes you so special that you run a business? Like, you know what I mean? And I thought that was really interesting. Is that, because we've been talking about this difference, is there really a difference? Like, you know, are we just thinking too highly of ourselves, you know, in this space, you know?
Oh, you're just asking questions that I have so much to answer. Okay,
well, that's better than being stumped and not having an answer,
yes.
I suppose.
Yes, it is. Okay, so first thing that I want to say is that very often founders find it very hard to confine with the life partners. And I was in a workshop in Germany with web developers, and they, you know, the subject kind of came up, and they said, I can't go and talk to my life partner because she doesn't understand a thing about what it is that I'm doing. And I can go and tell her, listen, there's this bug that I'm trying to fix, but and I can't find the right solution, and I can't get my head around it. And she will understand that you know, that I'm concerned about a problem, but she won't get it. And I had this founder who said, my biggest problem is that I can't go home and talk to my husband because he knows that whenever there's a problem, you just go and fix it. But what happens when there's a problem that you can't really go and fix right now? Because it depends so much on sealing that deal and getting that and passing that specific test and getting this type of approval And only when all the elements will be, structured and there, the problem will get solved. And she said that, as a founder. So I think because founders must get the energy or find that internal energy solely within themselves, and they really kind of fuel themselves by their own skills, by their own experiences, by their own confidence and know-how, that the type of burnout that founders experience might be different than the type of burnout other people who are not founders suffer from. And I want to give you an example. One of the things that creates burnout is repetitiveness and repetitive tasks, right? When you need to do the same thing on and on again, then you're prone to develop burnout. It doesn't happen. This doesn't apply to founders.
Right.
Founders never find themselves repeating the same thing over and over again. There's always huge difference.
It's actually context switching burnout, which is more likely. I found it's the mental exhaustion from, like, almost what was right back at the beginning, what you were saying about having to have those conversations at different levels with different people and and in different languages, and it's actually the exhaustion from managing all of those different relationships, all those different channels, all those different contexts, different subjects, different problems, and it's continually changing. That's the exhausting bit. It almost, in some ways, I would find it too easy and boring, actually, to do the same thing again and again and again.
Yeah.
Like, I would just get bored of it. I wouldn't get burnt out by it. I'd get bored. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I fully understand. And, there's being bored, being burnt out is not just being depleted out of energy. It's being in a place where you find it very hard to bounce back from the state of lack of efficiency, lack of purpose that you get in doing your job. Being burnt out, by the way, is medically speaking, is always related to the workplace. It's a state of chronic workplace stress. And so if I look at the stress that founders deal with, it's the stress of the never-ending problems that pop up. It's the stress of the deadlines that you need to meet. It's the stress of the complexities that you're supposed to, cope with.
I suppose in some ways it's almost like nihilism winning, right? In your mind, this idea that it's an unsurmountable task, that it is that what's ahead of you. I think a lot of being a founder is being overwhelmingly optimistic. To build something that no one has built, or do something that no one has done, despite the odds being absolutely against you. And then really the burnout stage is when you kind of succumb to the odds being stacked against you, and you're just like, it is against me. Like, I can't do this. And then on top of that, exhaustion. I usually find physical health is associated with that too. So I will probably end up with a cold, feeling run down, tired, fatigued. I'll probably end up with this headache. You know what I mean? So, but I think there's there's an element of kind of almost like your nihilistic thoughts that are kind of that you kind of repress on a regular basis. That they end up winning somewhat, to kind of just be like, this is pointless. What are you doing? That's my experience.
Yeah. I understand. I understand what you're saying. I understand, and I think that if I look at and I fully acknowledge what you're saying. If I take the broader perspective of founder burnout, there's always the notion of the never-ending worry. Like your to-do list is never ending.
Yeah.
And I think this is the most exhausting reality that you need to face when you're a founder, and it will never stop until that place where you will say, okay, this is where I draw the line. This is where I stop, and I know that I will have to pay some price, because not answering this email today means that I will have to deal with that tomorrow. But it will also mean that I will get 30 minutes more of sleep time, which is just, priceless. So important for parents, for founders, and for everyone.
Absolutely. But I mean, this is exactly why we talk a lot about in this space about being organized and about putting in processes and operations and all that to make it easy to prioritize things, to understand what is priority, what isn't, and to hopefully create some sort of relief, unburdening you of the pressure of making it easy to make those decisions in the first place, to know what is easy or not to focus, what should be focused on and what shouldn't. But again,
yes,
when you're first starting out, you don't have any of those frameworks, and it's a trial by fire. It absolutely is.
It is a trial by fire, and only as you go along you see what works and what doesn't. But maybe it's not a but. If you can visualize like a sinkhole, okay? Sinkhole is usually a state where you have like you have the ground and you have layers beneath that, and for some reason those layers kind of just wear out, and then the ground just topples down, right? This is the type of burnout I think founders have. Their energy is being depleted because the resource is themselves.
Right.
And once you exhaust that, that well of capabilities, everything will just, crumble inside.
Of course, because you rely so heavily on your own,
exactly,
the composition of yourself in order to make things happen, and less so on others. Whereas in other forms of employment, you're relying on the structure of the business and other people to make a lot of it happen. So yeah, I see.
Maybe I can conclude. Do I still have time to make one final observation?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
So I tried earlier in my career as a startup psychologist. I tried to equate the job of a founder to other jobs. I asked myself, well, what other jobs are like? Why is it so special? It can't be that unique, There must be other jobs that are as demanding or whatever. And after scrutinizing quite a lot of positions, I got to the fact that being a founder is really unique, and that the only other types of jobs that resemble being a founder, there are actually three. It's that of surgeons, okay, who are often, the guys in the forefront of the work that they need to do. They are the responsible ones. They are the ones like really, controlling the surgical arena where they operate, and the operating room, and then like going, give me this, give me that. I need to do this. I need to do that. But they are very skilled people, right? They are people who learn for decades and get better at doing what they do just by the experience that they gather. And they have loads of people supporting them. Okay, so this is one type of role that I thought might resemble in the aspect of the
from both like a responsibilities matrix and a psychological makeup matrix.
Yeah. Thanks for the help. So this is this is one role. The second one is that of special forces operator, or a special forces officer, or whatever. Yes, you need to be very good at your role, and you need to solve problems as they present themselves, and you need to be very agile and very astute, and you need to be really someone with very high capabilities and intelligent and everything. But still, you have a very, very specific mission, and you know exactly what your mission is, and you work a lot of time to get that mission done right. And there's a whole ecosystem, the whole intel and logistic support, and you have a crew with you. And so, yes, you need to do very dangerous things, and that is where this correlates to what founders do. And you need to do that in under very difficult conditions, just like founders have to do. But you have a whole suit of armor, so to speak, in the people that are around you, in the skills that you've developed over time to make you able in your mission. And the last role that I found, or the last job, so to speak, that I found, was that of athletes. Very high-performing individuals, very motivated. That is where they are like founders. Very ambitious. They need to rely on themselves. They need to be sure that everything in their body, every muscle in their body works the way they want it to, so that they will be able to achieve that goal. Okay? But they too, they can train all of their lives to get to the Olympics, to get to that specific event or competition or whatever. And then after they're done, they can rest.
I'll give you two more.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll give you two more. And by the way, I've worked with two founders that were previously surgeons, terrible founders. I've worked with multiple founders who are ex-military, amazing founders. Interestingly, but I won't go into the specifics of why. Maybe that's maybe for another episode. But I'll give you two more that I've come across, and in my thinking, film directors, and musicians. Now, I'm talking both of these at a certain level, right? Not if you're doing it. Well, I mean, actually, the levels of career in there also mimic to some degree the levels of career from a startup, early stage, pre-revenue, right up to Series A and so on. But those two, if you really sit down and think, especially film directors, hugely interesting, because the crazy thing about a film is that it's essentially a business that you have to start, pop up, operate it, and close it down in a specific time frame, and it disappears and it never exists again. And that's crazy when you think about it. For some of these productions that do this on a very large scale, and the fact that this director comes in, is fully responsible, plans for years, it pops up, they shoot for 18 months, they edit, the film gets released, that's it, it's done. That's done. And that's right. The psychology behind that and the complexity of that is insane. And then musicians as well is another one, but that's something for you to think about. But we do need to wrap up because of I need to go and pick up my son from school soon.
That's important.
But
you need to go take care of your startup.
I do. My other startup. Yeah. But it's been hugely interesting having you on. We didn't get a chance to talk about loneliness, which is a topic but we did purposefully kind of say that we may not because, to be honest, I think it is a thread through everything we've talked about. A lot of it is codependent, really, I think, on so much of it. And that's a common thread. And it's a common thread in every conversation I have had on the show, as well as when I meet people and talk to them. There is an element of loneliness and isolation, which it comes back to all the things we were talking about, essentially. And really the reason why I think, you have the clients you have, right? It's there aren't many people to talk to about this stuff, and there's not very many people that understand it. It requires a unique understanding and approach, hence why you exist, right? And you do what you do. So I really appreciate being on the show, but I just thought I'd mention that there was a topic there that we hadn't intentionally forgotten about. It's just time. So in case anyone's wondering why we didn't bring it up, then they know. So thank you so much. Where should people go to check you out and hear more about you, or if they want to work with you, what would be the process be for that?
Well, just reach out either via my website, which is Yariv Ganor, YARIVGANOR.com, and or via LinkedIn, which is also under my name. And if you've already checked this out, if you've listened through this whole podcast, then it probably means that you are, I don't know if bothered is the right word, but you're preoccupied with something. Find someone. It doesn't have to be me. Find someone to share those thoughts with. Find a mentor, find a partner, find a Sherpa. I don't know. Just find someone you trust.
A witch doctor. Yeah, anyone. Yeah.
Find someone you trust, whom you know will be able to understand you and possibly keep you running and feeling good about yourself.
Great. Well, I'll put the links to your website and your LinkedIn in the profile. And if there's anything that we haven't talked about and people want to comment down below, then please do. If there's any questions that you have for us, put them in the comments. We'll try and reply to them. Thank you again, Yariv, for joining me. I really, really appreciate it. And
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
My pleasure, my absolute pleasure. It's been really eye-opening. We should probably look to do this again in future. Maybe we can look back at some more clips, or just have a general conversation. Who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, that would be great.
Awesome. All right. Well, have a great rest of your week, and speak soon.
Thank you for listening and/or watching. Please like and subscribe. Or if you are listening via podcasting service and want to show your support, consider rating or leaving a review. It really helps. See you next week.